Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you and God's mercy. Welcome to this session on the Qur'an 101, in which we'll take an introduction to the noble Qur'an. And we'll begin by asking a very straightforward question, which is, what is the Qur'an? Right? What is the Qur'an? And we know the obvious answer that, the Qur'an is the sacred text of Islam. But what is the reality of the Qur'an? The Qur'an itself expresses this in the opening chapter. The Qur'an is arranged in 114 chapters of varying lengths. The opening chapter, which is called the opening, Al-Fatiha, begins with praise of God, right? And just as a footnote here, of course, the word Allah is simply the Arabic name for God. God being the one worthy of worship. So it is not a particular God named Allah, but rather the name of God in Arabic is Allah, and it is used both by Muslims and also by Christians and others as well. So it begins with praise of God, and then there is a call made by the believer. Right? And that call expresses the most urgent human need. And that urgent human need is the need for guidance. The need for guidance. In the 6th verse, after praise of God in the opening verses, the servant says, Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Guide us, O Lord, to the straight path. Guide us to the straight path, right? And what is the straight path? It is the way of attaining unto God's pleasure, the way of securing the good of this life and the good of the hereafter, right? So this is the call of the one yearning for God, and there's an immediate divine response, because right after the opening chapter closes, and the opening chapter is rather brief, it's only 7 verses, and that was the 6th verse. In the opening of the 2nd chapter is the immediate divine response. God Almighty says there, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Alif Lam Mim, this is the book in which there is no doubt. And what is it? Hudan lil muttaqin. It is a guidance for the mindful. It is a guidance for those mindful of God. And those mindful of God are of 2 levels. There are those who've attained unto a level of mindfulness, of piety, of righteousness. And this term, the mindful, also encompasses those sincerely striving to be of those who are mindful believers, righteous believers, believers who are pious, who love God, and who strive for the good. And what is the Qur'an? It is a guidance. It shows the way. It shows the straight path, the path of uprightness to the attainment of piety and those qualities that are beloved to God, and through which one becomes a servant who is guided, who finds the good of this life and the good of the next. So the purpose of the Qur'an is to show us the way to God, and to describe the way of characterizing oneself with those traits that are pleasing to God and that enable the sincere seeker to attain both to the good of this life and the good of the hereafter. And another way of looking at what the Qur'an is to look at a classical definition of the Qur'an, right? Because the scholars in the various disciplines of Islam would pay particular attention to defining terms and concepts, and they define the Qur'an for us. What is the Qur'an? The Qur'an is defined as being the speech of God, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, through the angel Gabriel, as guidance to humanity to seek the good, to seek God and to attain unto the good of this life and the next. There's a little typo there, I'm sorry. So as guidance for humanity to seek God and to attain unto the good of this life and the next. Let's look at the component parts, right? Because these help us appreciate what the Qur'an is. The first aspect of the definition of the Qur'an is that the Qur'an is the speech of God. The Qur'an is the address of God to His creation. And as we will see in some verses coming up, this is a tremendous event, right? The fact that God, who is the creator of all things, the sustainer of all things, right? Because our understanding of God is that God is not only the one who created everything, but He is the one who sustains everything at every moment. Only God has absolute existence and reality. The existence and reality of everything else is derived and dependent, right? And it is God who is sustaining things, right? Now, God addresses His creation, particularly those whom He has made morally responsible. And this address could have been direct without an intermediary, right? But it would have been unbearable, right, in its tremendousness. So God chose that this address of His be revealed through the medium of a book, right? So we read the Qur'an, we recite the Qur'an, we consider this to be our action, right? So we consider the Qur'an insofar as it is what we do, right? But that is not really the most significant reality for the believer of understanding and awareness with respect to the Qur'an. Rather, it is the speech of God, that when the believer is reciting the Qur'an, they hold and understand that the reality is that this is God addressing them, right? So it is the speech of God, right? And it is in that sense that it is said that the Qur'an is eternal, right? Because speech is an attribute of God, right? So it is the speech of God. And the significance here is that for the believer, right, when they read the Qur'an, this is God's direct address to them. And God chose that this speech be expressed through the medium of a book that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And this act of revelation is what makes someone a prophet, right? A prophet in the Islamic tradition is defined as being an honored servant of God whom God chose to grant direct revelation, right? And that revelation was sometimes, took the form of books that those prophets compiled, and we believe in the great biblical prophets. But this revelation is something that is unique to prophets, and the final prophet sent by God is the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And this revelation took place through the angel Gabriel, right? The angel Gabriel, who's mentioned in the biblical tradition as well, is the angel of revelation. He's the one who conveys God's messages to the prophets, right? And the prophets, of course, have direct inspiration from the divine and even direct revelation. But the Qur'an came through the angel Gabriel, right? And what is the function of this book? It is guidance for humanity. Right? It is guidance for humanity. What is guidance? Guidance is to show the way. The way to what? Right? As guidance for humanity, to seek the pleasure of God. Right? This is the concern. Right? This is the concern. We want to seek the pleasure of God, to be of those who truly love God and who are themselves beloved to God, who express their thankfulness to God in the ways that are pleasing to God, right? Out of a sense of thankfulness for the blessings that God has bestowed us. The very blessing of life is a gift from God, right? At every moment we are indebted to God for the gift of life. And in pursuit of human interest as individuals, as families, as communities, as societies, as humanity, as God's creation, to seek the good for ourselves and for others, the good of this life and the good of the next. Right? So this is what we understand the Qur'an to be. And the why a believer takes the Qur'an so seriously is that this is the divine address, right? The Qur'an is the address of God to us, right? And in that sense, it is something that is tremendous. One has a sense of reverent awe and also of overflowing love for this book. And there's beautiful verses in the 59th chapter related to the power of the Qur'an, and they also express the central theme of the Qur'an, which is belief in God. In verse 21 onwards, Allah Most High says, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. Had we sent down this Qur'an upon a mountain, you would have seen it humbled and crumble from the awe of God. These are examples we give to people that perhaps they will reflect. And then Allah Most High tells us, هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو. He is God. There is no God but Him. عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. The knower of the unseen and the manifest. He is all merciful, most kind. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. He is God. There is no God but Him. He is the King, the pure, the peace, the bestower of faith, the watchful, the exalted, the compeller, the supreme. Exalted is God above all that they ascribe with Him. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى. He is God, the creator, the inventor, the fashioner. To Him belong the most beautiful names. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Him, and He is the exalted and wise. So these were verses 21 to 24 of the 59th chapter. And here God is describing Himself to us, and the Qur'an is the address of that God that is the creator of all things, the one who fashioned everything, the one who has the most beautiful names and attributes, who is characterized by every attribute of perfection. Everything besides Him is both created by Him and is being sustained by Him at every moment. And this glorifying that the creation is engaged in, the heavens and the earth glorify God. This is an intrinsic glorification of the fact that they are His creation and that they are signs of God, and that at every moment they're being sustained by Him, right? And therefore, in this is a reminder for those who are morally responsible that they have a responsibility before God, that God chose that human beings be morally responsible, right? On the basis of God making them responsible. And what are they responsible for? They're responsible for the guidance that God has given them in the Qur'an, which is that one seek His pleasure in this life, that one worship Him as He has commanded, that one seek the good for oneself and for others, that one avoid harming oneself and one avoid harming others, right? And this is why